The summer sun blazed down on the streets of Manhattan, reflecting off the glass skyscrapers and casting long, jagged shadows across the bustling sidewalks. Elijah Rivers, a black CEO whose name had become synonymous with innovation and excellence in the tech world, stepped carefully out of his sleek, chauffeured car. The city's energy hummed around him, taxis honking, people chatting loudly on phones, and construction crews clanging in the distance. Elijah was no stranger to this chaos. In fact, he thrived in it. Yet today, something felt different. Today, he had a crucial meeting with one of the largest tech conglomerates in the country. His company, Technova Solutions, was on the brink of securing a partnership that could reshape the industry. His reputation preceded him. Boardrooms had reverently whispered his name, but as Elijah approached the entrance, it was painfully clear that the world outside his own circle didn't know who he was. He adjusted his tailored navy suit and smoothed the crease of his expensive trousers. The polished leather of his shoes caught the sunlight with a subtle gleam, each detail screaming professionalism and success. Yet, to the people on the street, he blended in seamlessly with the crowd. His carefully curated image mattered little to the assumptions of strangers. As he walked toward the entrance of the building, a valet in a crisp, starched uniform stepped forward, his hand extended in a polite but expectant gesture. The young man's eyes lingered on Elijah's suit, then drifted downward to the man's polished shoes. There was a pause, a subtle hesitation, before he spoke. "Sir, can I help you with your car?" The words were polite, but they carried an unspoken assumption. This man in front of me is here to park cars, not run a company worth billions. Elijah froze. The moment stretched, and the city's background noise seemed to fade into a tense silence. His mind raced as he processed the scene. In a city like Manhattan, assumptions were fast, and sometimes cruel. Here he was, a black man in a perfectly tailored suit, being mistaken for someone far below his station. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had built an empire from scratch, yet in a split second, his presence was dismissed based on appearance alone. For a fleeting moment, Elijah felt the familiar sting of indignity, a subtle pang that he had learned to endure countless times throughout his life. His shoulders tensed slightly, his jaw tightened, and he caught himself taking a measured breath. This was a test of patience, a reminder that even in moments of success, the world often judged too quickly. But Elijah Rivers was no stranger to turning moments of discomfort into opportunities for control. He met the valet's gaze calmly, his expression composed, a quiet authority radiating from him. There was no bitterness in his eyes, only a steady, unflinching awareness. "Sure," he said smoothly, his voice measured, almost conversational. "But I think you might need these." With deliberate care, Elijah handed the valet the keys to the car parked right in front of him. The sleek black vehicle gleamed in the sunlight, its polished surface reflecting the surrounding buildings and the astonished expressions of onlookers. The valet's eyes widened instantly, his hand trembling as he reached to take them. Shock and confusion flashed across his face. He had expected a timid, deferential man, someone who would silently accept the indignity of menial work. Instead, he was confronted with a scenario that defied all assumptions. The luxury car, the poised demeanor, the calm but commanding presence. None of it matched his preconceived notion of who this man was. Around them, a few passers-by slowed their pace, sensing the unusual tension in the air. Phones discreetly appeared, snapping photos of the scene as whispers began circulating. Elijah noticed none of this. His focus remained steady, his mind already strategizing for the meeting ahead. The valet, still visibly stunned, stammered, trying to speak but unable to form coherent words. The keys rested in his hand like a tangible symbol of the world's misconceptions, a reminder that appearance often overshadowed reality. Elijah Rivers, a man who had navigated boardrooms with billion-dollar deals and high-stakes negotiations, stood in the heat of Manhattan, confronting the quiet injustice of being judged before being known. Finally, Elijah gave a faint, almost imperceptible nod, signaling that the moment had passed. He turned toward the building, his posture straight, his every step deliberate and unshakable. In a city full of assumptions and hurried judgments, he carried himself with a dignity that demanded recognition, even if the world was slow to offer it. And as he walked past the valet, leaving a trail of disbelief in the young man's wake, Elijah reminded himself once more that true power didn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it existed in the calm, steady grace of handling the world's misjudgments with silent confidence. The summer sun blazed down on the streets of Manhattan, bouncing off the towering glass skyscrapers and casting fractured reflections across the busy sidewalks. The city was alive with its usual chaos: horns honking, street vendors shouting, and the distant wail of a siren cutting through the hum of conversations. Among all this, Elijah Rivers stepped out of his sleek, black chauffeured car, every movement deliberate, measured, and precise. Elijah Rivers. The name carried weight in boardrooms and tech circles alike. A black CEO who had built a multi-billion-dollar software empire from scratch. A man of sharp intellect and calm authority. And yet, at this moment, in the middle of Manhattan's relentless pace, he was invisible. Dressed in a perfectly tailored navy suit and polished leather shoes, he looked every bit the successful executive he was. But the world outside his own sphere seemed unwilling to see past his skin color. To anyone glancing quickly, he could have been just another man trying to get by, another stranger lost among the city's crowds. He adjusted his tie as he approached the entrance of a towering glass building that housed one of the country's largest tech conglomerates. He had a crucial meeting today, one that could determine the trajectory of his company for years. Every detail mattered: his presentation, his demeanor, his confidence, but he hadn't anticipated the first challenge of the day: assumptions. A young valet, crisp in his starched uniform and polished shoes, stepped forward, eyes narrowing as they settled on Elijah. He tilted his head slightly, uncertain, and spoke with the practiced politeness of someone accustomed to serving the city's elite. "Sir, can I help you with your car?" His hand extended, expectant, as if waiting for a key to be placed into it. For a split second, Elijah froze. Disbelief flashed across his face, sharp and fleeting. The valet had mistaken him for someone far beneath his station, a parking attendant, a worker tasked with handling other people's wealth, rather than a man who actually owned it. The realization hit with an uncomfortable clarity. In a city famed for its fast judgments, he had been reduced to a stereotype in the eyes of a stranger. The sting was subtle but unmistakable, a familiar pang Elijah had endured too often in his life. Despite his success, despite his wealth, he could not escape the assumptions cast by the world around him. His jaw tightened, and he took a measured breath, feeling the weight of invisible scrutiny settle around him like a physical presence. But Elijah Rivers had learned a lifetime's worth of lessons in patience and composure. He understood that power often wasn't loud or visible. It was quiet, calculated, and undeniable. And in this moment, he chose to wield it. A calm, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips as he met the valet's eyes. His voice was steady, polite, but carried the weight of authority. "Sure," he said smoothly, "but I think you might need these." From his pocket, he retrieved the keys to the luxury car parked directly in front of him. The vehicle gleamed under the mid-morning sun, a sleek, black symbol of wealth and success, its polished surface reflecting the towering buildings and bustling street. The valet's eyes widened in disbelief, his mouth opening slightly, then closing as he struggled to form words. His hand hovered over the keys, trembling ever so slightly. He had expected a timid, ordinary man, perhaps a junior employee or someone new to the building. Instead, he was confronted with the tangible proof of Elijah's position, a car worth millions, handed to him with effortless authority. Around them, a few passers-by slowed, sensing the tension. Phones discreetly appeared, capturing the strange and compelling tableau. Whispers floated through the crowd as curiosity spread like wildfire. Elijah, however, remained untouched by the spectacle. His focus was unshaken, already shifting to the meeting that awaited inside the building. The valet, still frozen, finally accepted the keys, his face a mixture of shock, guilt, and embarrassment. He had learned, in the most immediate way, the danger of assumptions. And yet, Elijah did not scold him, did not make a scene. His dignity remained intact. Every step he took toward the building was deliberate, measured, and composed, a silent demonstration of the quiet strength that had brought him to this point. In the heart of Manhattan, amidst the relentless flow of traffic and the casual judgments of strangers, Elijah Rivers had turned an insult into a lesson. He had shown that appearances could be deceiving, that assumptions could be challenged without anger, and that true power was always recognized eventually, even if the world was slow to notice. And as he walked past the valet, leaving behind a stunned young man and a small crowd of gawking onlookers, Elijah's mind was already on the meeting ahead. In a city that judged too quickly, he had once again proven that calm, measured dignity could speak louder than any luxury car or expensive suit. The conference room was alive with the usual pre-meeting chatter, papers rustling, laptops opening, the low hum of air conditioning, and occasional muffled phone notifications. Executives leaned over tablets, whispered among themselves, and sipped coffee with half-focused attention. To them, the morning agenda seemed routine, another meeting in a long chain of strategic discussions. None of them had the slightest clue that the most important person in the room hadn't even revealed himself yet. Elijah Rivers stepped through the glass doors, with quiet precision. Every step was deliberate, a controlled rhythm that radiated authority even before he spoke. He carried no briefcase, no notes, just the weight of his presence. And yet, initially, the room barely registered him. Eyes flicked toward him briefly, then returned to screens and conversations. A few young assistants exchanged puzzled glances. "Who is he?" one whispered. Another shrugged, typing quickly on her laptop as if the man's presence was irrelevant. Elijah didn't rush. He scanned the room with a calm, steady gaze, taking in the array of suits, ties, and polished shoes. In the midst of this corporate sea, he seemed like an anomaly, too composed, too self-assured, and, to anyone relying on first impressions, easily dismissed as a new assistant. He moved toward the head of the table, each stride measured, his tailored navy suit moving with effortless elegance. A murmur ran through the room, subtle yet noticeable, as some executives realized he wasn't just passing by. He was taking a seat at the center of authority. Elijah placed his laptop in front of him, the screen flicking on with a quiet hum. He leaned back slightly in his chair, hands clasped with casual authority, and looked around. "Good morning," he said, his voice calm, rich, and precise. The effect was immediate. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Eyes widened. The executives froze, caught between disbelief and confusion. Something in his tone, his posture, and the quiet command of the room made it impossible to ignore him. Whispers began to ripple through the room. Is he one of the assistants?" one manager asked softly, glancing nervously at her neighbor. Another shook his head, muttering, "He looks different." Their assumptions hung in the air, fragile and soon to be shattered. Just then, the door at the far end of the room opened with a crisp, authoritative click. Richard Grant, the CEO of the tech conglomerate, entered. He was a man of presence, tall, broad-shouldered, with salt and pepper hair and a gaze that could pierce through confidence and facade alike. His eyes swept across the table, scanning the faces of his executives, then settled on Elijah. Grant paused, adjusting his cufflinks, a small frown of curiosity forming. "I don't think we've met," he said, his voice firm, slightly tinged with authority. "Are you one of our new staff?" The words hung in the air like a challenge. The room's tension thickened, and all eyes snapped toward Elijah, waiting for a response. The assumption in Grant's tone was clear. He had underestimated this man, misjudged his place in the corporate hierarchy. Elijah leaned forward slightly, resting one hand on the laptop and keeping the other folded neatly on the table. His voice was calm, precise, and unwavering. "Actually," he said, each word measured, "I'm Elijah Rivers, the founder and CEO of Technova Solutions." Silence fell like a heavy curtain. For a brief moment, it was as if the room had stopped breathing. Heads snapped toward him. Eyes widened, brows rose, and a few executives exchanged glances of shock and awe. The man they had assumed was a low-level assistant, the one who had walked in silently, without fanfare, was in fact the very leader who would shape the deal they were about to discuss. Grant's mouth opened slightly, then closed, as his mind scrambled to reconcile the discrepancy. He had prepared for a routine briefing, for someone polite, eager, and relatively inexperienced. Instead, he was confronted with the founder of a multi-billion-dollar company, radiating quiet confidence and undeniable authority. The room's energy shifted instantly. Skepticism transformed into respect. Whispers gave way to attentive gazes. Laptops were forgotten. Notebooks remained closed. Every executive in that room recognized, without needing confirmation, that this man was not only significant but commanding. Elijah Rivers leaned back, the faintest smile touching his lips. He didn't gloat, didn't emphasize his position, and didn't raise his voice. He simply existed in that space with authority so natural that it forced recognition. Every micro-expression, every pause, every gesture was a lesson in quiet power. Minutes later, Grant, the seasoned CEO, cleared his throat and nodded slowly. He understood, as did the executives, that they were in the presence of someone extraordinary, a leader whose presence demanded attention, whose intellect would shape the conversation, and whose influence could not be ignored. Elijah opened his laptop, clicked through the first slides of the presentation, and the room leaned in. From disbelief to awe, the transformation was complete. The man they had underestimated had become the center of their focus, proving that appearances could deceive, assumptions could mislead, and true leadership could never be hidden for long. Later that morning, as the meeting unfolded in the high-rise boardroom overlooking the Manhattan skyline, Elijah Rivers leaned back slightly in his chair, his hands folded over the polished surface of the conference table. The sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, glinting off the glass walls and casting long, dramatic shadows across the room. Around him, executives scribbled notes, whispered quietly, and occasionally glanced toward him with a mixture of curiosity and growing respect. Elijah's mind, however, drifted briefly to the earlier encounter outside. The image of the young valet's outstretched hand, the polite yet presumptuous question, the assumption that he, a black CEO, founder of a multi-billion-dollar tech company, was just another worker, lingered vividly. It was a moment small in time but loaded with a harsh truth. Despite all his accomplishments, despite the wealth and influence he wielded, the world's biases were still waiting, just beneath the surface. He could feel the memory like a weight on his chest, a subtle ache reminding him that assumptions were alive, even in circles where intellect and achievement were supposed to command respect. The valet's mistake wasn't malicious, it was instinctive, a reflection of a society that often judged based on appearances rather than merit. But the sting of being underestimated, of having one's presence misread, was something Elijah had learned to carry without allowing it to define him. He exhaled slowly, letting the tension melt away, and refocused on the task at hand. The meeting continued, and under his calm guidance, negotiations progressed seamlessly. He presented projections, outlined strategic partnerships, and addressed potential concerns with a blend of precision and confidence that left no doubt about his expertise. Every question posed by the executives was met with a measured, articulate response, and every point of hesitation was handled with a quiet authority that commanded attention without ever raising his voice. For Elijah, moments like the valet encounter were instructive, a subtle reminder that true power didn't always announce itself with grandeur or loud declarations. It was measured in how one carried oneself when misjudged, in how one could remain composed under scrutiny, and in how one could transform small injustices into opportunities for dignity and grace. In that way, bias became not a limitation but a tool, an opportunity to teach without confrontation, to correct assumptions without arrogance, and to demonstrate the quiet strength that comes from a lifetime of resilience. By the time the meeting drew to a close, the energy in the room had shifted completely. Executives who had initially approached the discussion with skepticism now listened attentively, their eyes following every gesture, their focus anchored on the man who had revealed himself not only as a leader, but as a presence impossible to ignore. Richard Grant, the CEO of the conglomerate, had been similarly transformed. What had begun as a routine meeting, expected to be handled by junior staff, had become a testament to Elijah's authority and intellect. After the room had emptied and the remaining aides gathered documents and laptops, Grant approached Elijah with a measured step, his face betraying a mixture of embarrassment and newfound respect. "I owe you an apology," he said, his voice low but sincere. "I don't know why I assumed anything. You've made it clear who you are, and I respect that." Elijah regarded him quietly, sensing the authenticity behind the words. There was no need for dramatics, no need to highlight the slight that had been cast moments before. Instead, he offered a nod, acknowledging the apology without dwelling on the insult. "Respect," he replied, his tone calm but firm, "is earned through actions, not assumptions." The statement hung in the air, a subtle reminder that judgment based solely on appearances was often misguided, and that credibility and authority were forged through deeds, not assumptions. Grant exhaled, a weight lifted from his shoulders, as he recognized the truth in Elijah's words. The CEO understood, perhaps more clearly than ever, that leadership could not be measured by appearances, titles, or even initial impressions. It was the consistency of action, the composure under pressure, and the ability to navigate bias and expectation with grace that truly defined a person's influence. Elijah, meanwhile, felt a quiet satisfaction. The earlier incident with the valet, which could have been a source of anger or frustration, had instead become a moment of clarity and reflection. It reminded him that society's judgments often lag behind reality, but that he had the power to redefine those perceptions, not through confrontation, but through calm dignity, unwavering competence, and an unshakable belief in his own worth. As he collected his laptop and prepared to leave the office, Elijah glanced out the window at the bustling streets below. The city moved at its relentless pace, full of assumptions, judgments, and missed opportunities to see people for who they truly were. And yet, in moments like these, he understood that he had already begun to rewrite the narrative, not just for himself, but for every person who faced misjudgment and bias. With a final nod to Grant, Elijah walked toward the elevator, each step a testament to the quiet, enduring power of dignity, resilience, and self-respect. As Elijah Rivers stepped out of the glass and steel tower later that afternoon, the streets of Manhattan stretched before him like a living, breathing organism. The sun had begun its slow descent, casting a warm, golden glow over the city's iconic skyline, reflecting off the countless windows of towering skyscrapers. The hum of traffic, the chatter of pedestrians, and the occasional blare of a taxi horn blended into a familiar urban symphony. Yet to Elijah, the city felt subtly different today, as if it had shifted in awareness, or perhaps as if he had shifted within it. His eyes scanned the street briefly and caught the young valet, still standing near the entrance, leaning slightly against the curb, hands in his pockets, jaw tight. The man's eyes followed Elijah's every step, reflecting disbelief, embarrassment, and perhaps a hint of newfound respect. The encounter earlier that morning had unsettled him, leaving a lingering impression that he would carry for a long time. Elijah's composure had been unshakable, but the valet's assumptions, brief, casual, and socially conditioned, had collided with reality in a way that was impossible to ignore. Elijah didn't glance back. There was no need. His confidence was not performative. It was the natural extension of a life built on achievement, resilience, and quiet dignity. Each step he took radiated assurance, a subtle assertion of his identity and worth. There was no anger in him, no need for confrontation or validation. The world's assumptions, as ingrained as they were, could never diminish what he had earned, what he had created, or the integrity he carried in every action. He approached the sleek black luxury car waiting curbside, his chauffeur already poised with a professional nod. The car was a symbol of his success, yes, but more than that, it was a vessel for the continuity of his journey. Sliding into the seat, he allowed himself a brief moment of reflection. Today's events were more than just an inconvenience or an awkward encounter. They were a microcosm of the world's biases, a reminder of how easily appearances can mislead, how quickly assumptions can be made, and how often society judges before understanding. The valet remained on the sidewalk as Elijah's car eased into traffic. His presence, the way he had been momentarily flustered, lingered in Elijah's mind, not as a source of irritation, but as a lesson in the subtleties of human behavior. The city thrummed around him, indifferent to the individual struggles within it, yet full of opportunities to challenge perceptions, to redefine expectations, and to demonstrate quiet authority in the face of misconception. As Elijah's vehicle glided down the bustling avenue, the city seemed to watch. Stories of the man who had been mistaken for a valet began to ripple outward. Social media posts circulated, captions and images capturing the moment of dissonance. An impeccably dressed black CO handing a luxury car's keys to a valet who had presumed he was an employee. Discussions ignited online, debates swirling around themes of perception, racial bias, and societal assumptions. People across the city and beyond began to examine their own judgments, questioning how often appearances guided their assumptions about others. Elijah, aware of none of this in the moment, allowed himself a quiet, reflective smile. He understood that true influence was not about viral moments or fleeting attention. It was about setting an example, through action, through dignity, through the quiet assertion of competence and self-respect. In every micro-moment, in every interaction, there was the potential to challenge prejudice, to educate without lecturing, and to demonstrate the inherent power of measured composure. In a city obsessed with appearances, status, and rapid judgments, Elijah Rivers had transformed what could have been a moment of humiliation into a demonstration of unwavering authority. He had shown that respect cannot be assumed. It must be observed and earned, not through assertion alone, but through the careful, deliberate conduct of one's life and work. The world may judge quickly, but real credibility and power, intellect, experience, character, cannot remain hidden indefinitely. As the car disappeared into the afternoon traffic, the skyline fading behind him, Elijah carried with him more than just the satisfaction of a successful meeting or the relief of navigating social prejudice. He carried a reaffirmation of his principles, that dignity, intelligence, and integrity were impervious to the world's assumptions, that moments of bias were opportunities for quiet, commanding lessons, and that his legacy was not merely wealth or influence, but the enduring respect he inspired through action rather than appearance. The streets of Manhattan went on, vibrant and impatient, full of assumptions and fleeting glances, but Elijah moved through them unshaken. Today, he had reminded the city, and perhaps himself, that appearances may deceive, but true authority, grounded in achievement, resilience, and self-respect, is always recognized eventually. And in a world that judges too quickly, he continued forward, leaving behind a trail not just of awe, but of a quiet, enduring example of power transformed into dignity.